doxyPrEP is one method that you can take an antibiotic called doxycycline to potentially prevent STIs. People are probably more familiar with a different way of taking doxycycline, which is doxyPEP, or post-exposure prophylaxis, where people take doxycycline as needed after a sexual encounter to prevent STIs. And there's been a lot more research on doxyPEP than there has been on doxyPrEP. So doxyPrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis, which means the idea is you would take the antibiotic before an encounter, and in this case, daily. So you take a lower dose than doxyPEP. So doxyPEP generally is 200 milligrams, or 2 tablets, or 2 capsules, and doxyPrEP is 100 milligrams, taken once daily during the period that you're sort of at risk.
We know that there are some people who take doxycycline at a smaller dose for their skin, and actually the body has reported on this. There was a person who went to a bear festival and all of his friends acquired chlamydia and he was the only one who didn't. It kept repeating throughout the years. He never got it, and he finally connected it to the doxycycline once he found out about PEP, doxyPEP, and was like, oh, could this be doxyPrEP? We also know that the more choice you have, the better. For some people, taking like a pill every day at a smaller dose just fits them better. For other people, doing it afterwards is what works on demand. So I guess what I've really heard is it's another option.
The story of doxyPEP and PrEP, depending on how you use it, right? Because if you're using it 4 times a week, you're really doing pre and post-exposure prophylaxis. So that line can be a little bit blurry depending on how frequently you're having sex. I think the evidence continues to mount that it's going to be a useful tool, particularly for men who are having sex with men. So the Canadian study that again looked at that population looks pretty positive. It's a relatively small study, but it's bearing out what we've seen in the French study, what we've seen in San Francisco, and what we've seen in a couple of other studies. There is also an intriguing study looking at women who engaged in transactional sex, who also showed some declines, reported a very high uptake of doxy. That's really important because it's the first signal we have that in women, or at least cisgender women who are having sex with men, that there may be some efficacy. We haven't seen that before. So, and people have been clamoring for data, including me, in that group of people. So I'm very eager to hear what people think about this and what the implications are going to be for guidance.
Because it was a small pilot study, we really focused on feasibility. So is it acceptable? Are people adhering to it? Do they tolerate it in terms of side effects? And so what we found was that it was in fact feasible. People adhered to it. Nearly 80% of our participants completed the study as sort of written out in the protocol. They adhered very well to it, according to one of our measures at least, and we're still doing some work on other adherence measures. And it was well tolerated, which we expect because we know doxycycline very well after many decades of using it. Our secondary outcomes included the outcomes I think you and everyone else are more interested in, which are the impacts on STIs. And what we found was, overall, the doxyPrEP group had an 80% reduction overall in the 3 STIs we were looking at, so syphilis, chlamydia, and gonorrhea. And breaking it down specifically by infection, we found that there was a 79% reduction in syphilis, and a 92% reduction in chlamydia, and a 68% reduction in gonorrhea, all of which were significant when our stats people did the numbers on it.
I think it's a wonderful tool. I know that there's a lot of concern about resistance developing, and that's usually more about gonorrhea.
Yes, people are very concerned about antimicrobial resistance. The biggest concern is probably gonorrhea, although we know that you can't use doxy to treat gonorrhea because it's evolved resistance. At least 25% of strains worldwide are doxy resistant. The concern is that if you continue to feed it more antibiotics and you sort of get the bug in an environment where it's more activated in a way, it's kind of a weird, complex molecular thing, but that it's going to make it even more likely to evolve faster. I'm not sure that's true, but I'm not sure it's a great idea. But gonorrhea is one thing. The other thing is, we use doxycycline a lot to treat staph infections when you can't use other drugs or you want to suppress it orally or treat it long term. So one thing I think we're going to have to be really cautious about is looking at community patterns of doxy resistance in MRSA or staph. And then there are some concerns about its effect on the microbiome in the gut, so the bugs that live in your gut. More to come on that. I think that's theoretical right now.
The one thing I will mention, and I'm not saying this to delegitimize or to minimize the concern around antimicrobial resistance, but one of the questions I always ask when this comes up is the level of intensity or is the level of persistence around this question around these questions relating to antimicrobial resistance, would there be that same intensity if we were suggesting this be used, as it is often, for things like acne or for malaria prophylaxis?
I think there should be guidelines. It all starts with guidelines because without them, a lot of doctors will not prescribe or will just stigmatize the people they're serving. And it's already hard enough for us to ask for things, I think. We automatically acquiesce to a doctor's wishes half of the time. So without those guidelines, it's going to be like, okay, and now I'm not being served, and now my care isn't being respected the way that I need it to be.